between 2019 and 2022. Around 93 million rand was spent on official residences. DA Shadow Public Service and Administration spokesperson Dr. Leon Schreiber joins us now for more on this. Good to have you, Dr. Schreiber, and thank you very much for your time. Obviously, you have been quite a hawk, so to speak, looking at this ministerial handbook and what has been coming out of there. We've been speaking to you, for example, around the water and lights bills that were being paid. We've been speaking around the solar systems that are going to be installed. You and I work, get a salary, we pay tax, and certainly we pay for our own water and lights. Is it justifiable, I mean, at all, that we are paying for generators and the diesel for the generators, plus a 1 million rands kitchen upgrade? Is it part of what is supposed to happen for these public properties?
Good evening, Thabo, and to the viewers. No, I don't think that any of this can be justified. And really, we've now reached a point, I think, in this campaign, as you say, of exposing the ministerial handbook, where urgent action is really required. So the latest revelations are about the 93 million rand that's been spent on upgrading these mansions in which ministers and deputy ministers live. So there's the sheer amount of money, which is the 93 million, but you must add to that, of course, the other benefits and perks that come through the ministerial handbook. This is things like VIP security, which is more than 500 million rand a year. It's things like staff members, more than 340 million rand a year. It's the luxury vehicles and the free water, the free electricity. And now we're learning generators, tens of millions of rands to keep those filled and going so that ministers don't experience the load shedding, which this government has caused.
Now, the minister himself seems to believe that there's mischief here, but here's what he says: we can assure the public that there is no political principle who is involved with the excessive finishes and all. I mean, we've heard this before. I mean, it's a similar situation, I suppose, where the president says, well, they were doing upgrades in my house, but I didn't quite know what they were doing. It was just upgrades that were happening there. Is there a point where we need to say, whether you knew or whether you didn't know, once you see it there, you need to take accountability for it?
Well, let me put it like this. I think there were 388 different invoices that were issued for upgrades to swimming pools. And I think the only thing missing from Minister Zikalala's statement is an attempt to call these things fire pools. The reality is that it is ministers, public officials who live in these houses. And it is very clear from the invoices that we've now obtained that we are dealing with massive tender inflation and potentially corruption. So some of the examples include 1.4 million rand spent on upgrading a kitchen at a house in Cape Town, more than 400,000 rand spent on fumigating cockroaches at a single property, 54,000 rand on a new curtain rail at a particular house, and 19,000 rand to change light bulbs. Now, this smacks of corruption. And the minister, in trying to excuse his colleagues and himself from accountability, is actually showing his hand. Because the minister has said, oh, no, he's feeling the pressure, he needs to investigate this. But then he preempts the outcome of an investigation by saying that there are no political principles involved. How does he know that? How does he know that these houses occupied by ministers and deputy ministers are not used as just another cash cow, where tenders are inflated so that cadres can take kickbacks from these things? That is what needs to be properly investigated. And the fact that the minister is already reaching this conclusion only makes it more clear that our complaint to the public protector is more than warranted. Yeah,
are potentially being prepared here for a fall guy kind of scenario where, again, it's going to be the contractor who inflated the prices.
The problem, of course, is that it would seem in this instance, different from the Nkandla scandal, that we have so many different aspects that you would likely have a massive network of different contractors involved as well. And that's why I'm saying if you're going to look at the service provider and the contractor, you must equally point the finger at the public officials who are setting and accepting these contracts. And I think that's where you're going to find potentially that we have unearthed here a network of corruption that is saying things like, oh, the light bulbs need to be replaced at this minister's house. Please charge an excessive amount, 19,000 rand to change light bulbs, so that I can skim a bit off the top. The same with an example of a 54,000 rand curtain rail or a 400,000 rand fumigation. These should send up very, very serious alarm bells that the Nkandla scandal around President Zuma and the abuse of public funds to ensure that people are secure in comfort is one that is continuing to escalate and across the government.
So say we admit, I mean, these are public buildings, they are public officials, they are serving the public, they need to live in these homes closer to where they work. They don't have to be absolute luxury, but they have to meet the bare, minimum requirements of a kitchen that has a tabletop, that has a stove and so on and so forth. But there is clearly some kind of fault in the decision-making process as to what we are going to fit there. And the minister saying I'll do an inquiry after the fact means there is something that is lacking before these payments and these invoices are approved. What is that?
Well, I think the first place you have to start to answer that question is to take into account that these properties are collectively worth nearly 1 billion rand, and we now know that they are costing close to 100 million rand every 2 years to maintain. That also includes the continued expenses on things like free water and electricity, the things that you are supposed to be paying to a municipality when you use these things. Why on earth our ministers don't pay for water and electricity that they use when we have an epidemic of load shedding in this country, I think is simply unjustifiable. But it's high time to ask the question whether these residences can at all be justified. Why not sell off these properties, use that money to assist Eskom out of the hole that it is in, and then provide simple housing vouchers for ministers who need to rent accommodation when they are not at home. This is a standard practice across the corporate world, and it will save taxpayers clearly billions, because there won't be any maintenance. There won't be any paying of rates accounts and water and free electricity. There certainly won't be maintenance of swimming pools, and I can assure you no landlord is going to let a tenant get away with a 54,000 rand curtain rail.
Yeah. Is the inquiry that the minister envisages here an independent inquiry, so there'll be more money spent to find out why you bought a curtain rail for 540,000, or is this a parliamentary process?
No, we've seen this pattern over and over again, Thabo. This is clearly something that's come from the department side, and that is now going to cost us even more money. That's why we are going to the Public Protector, an institution that is already funded with a budget, that is already set up to ensure that there are proper investigations and accountability, and that is one channel to pursue. But the other thing is the systemic problem here. There is nothing preventing the president, because remember, at the end of the day, all of this goes back to President Ramaphosa. He is the one who decides what is in that ministerial handbook. There is nothing that prevents him from saying, this farce has gone on long enough. Let's sell off these properties, invest that money back into the economy, and create a housing subsidy system for where rental properties are needed. And the other thing is to fix the systemic problems around the ministerial handbook. The DA has submitted our cut cabinet perks bill to Parliament. It will ensure that there's proper oversight, proper accountability, and it will address the first question you asked this evening, which is at the beginning of the process, ensuring that you prevent corruption, that you prevent this kind of obscene wastage, and that is by ensuring proper, transparent parliamentary oversight. The President and his government are clearly abusing this system for their own gain, and it is time to bring an end to that impunity.
So from where you're sitting, Dr. Schreiber, the government property maintenance program, are you saying it's just literally being allowed to have a blank check, carte blanche, do as it pleases?
We have substantial evidence in these invoices that is exactly what's happening. So when you have a regular amount of 25,000 rand being charged to refill or service a generator, when you have examples like 450,000 rand being spent to install a new generator, and an example like 190,000 rand to check cameras that are not working, those are telltale signs of massive tender inflation and corruption, and this government has proven that it can in fact not be trusted. Everything it touches turns to corruption, and that is why I'm saying let's move away from the system where the government is expected to manage these properties, maintain these properties, because clearly they've proven that they cannot do so in a way that is not corrupt. Let's bring an end to that, and let's face the fact that they cannot be trusted to actually look after public money.
Surely we can't say the system is that broken, because the system works in other instances, the procurement system. What is so broken? How do you not look at an invoice and say it's fumigation? It can't cost 74,000, right? And also, why am I doing it 3 times? And every time I'm doing it, I'm paying 54 or 74,000 rands. What exactly is going on there?
So like I said, I think there are a couple of elements at play. There is, of course, the questionable ethics of the people involved in that decision. It is a lack of leadership. Remember, these are houses of ministers. These are people that we entrust with billions of rands in government budgets, who are not even bothering to check when these kind of invoices end up at the properties that they occupy. That's the first thing, a lack of ethical leadership. The second thing is what I said about the ministerial handbook system. There is no law that regulates this handbook. There is no law that compels the president to go to parliament when he wants to add benefits and to indeed to report on the expenditure. It just happens in complete secrecy. That's why it's been a year of the DA's campaign to expose this handbook. That's why it was necessary, because these things are done in secret. And when you create an environment like that, where there's secrecy, where there's space for people with questionable ethics, then these kind of things are going to happen. And the third point is really a separate question. Can South Africa afford to continue having a system where we are spending this kind of money on maintaining billion-rand mansions for ministers and deputies, when there is a simple solution in the form of a housing subsidy to actually rent a property when you are out of town and you need to use that? I think that question, the answer to that question should be very clear in the midst of an extreme cost of living crisis where millions of South Africans cannot feed their families. And that is really why it is time to move away from this broken system.
Yeah. Is that the figure, is that the number that is normally being spent? We are looking at a period from 2019 to 2022, so about 100 million is spent on the property maintenance program.
Yes, that's what we've seen now, is that's the amount that has been spent over that period. But as I say, if you actually go and look at things like VIP security, if you go and look at things like staff members, because you must remember at all of these properties, there are staff members that are being employed to actually serve the needs of the ministers. One of the positions that exists here is something called a food aide. Now, I don't know what that is. It sounds like someone who helps the minister to chew their food. And these are all the kind of expenses that add up to 1 billion rand per year of actually looking after our ministers. Now, when you get a salary, and ministers get a generous salary of 2.5 million rand a year, then surely things like water, electricity, a generator if you want it, maintaining your swimming pool, those expenses must be for your own pocket. And that's where the ministerial handbook is such an incredible crime perpetrated against the people of South Africa, because it actually pays for the things that ministers themselves should be paying for.
Dr. Schreiber, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for highlighting this and bringing this up. And of course,